Chapter 1: The Bet, the Needles, and the New Year. Brandon Wells had always believed life was a series of electives disguised as emergencies. You didn't get to choose the lesson plan, but you did get to choose whether to actually learn something, or just repeat the class until the universe got tired of giving pop quizzes. At 33, he finally felt like he was passing most of those quizzes. Not with honors, but with competence, which he valued more. On the first Thursday of the new year, he stood in the center aisle of Craft World, staring at a wall of knitting needles like they were weapons from a fantasy novel. Metal, bamboo, plastic, straight, circular, double-pointed, each promising some level of frustration. The packaging smiled at him with cheerful fonts he didn't trust. He scratched his jaw. How complicated can yarn be? A grandmotherly woman beside him snorted. Sweetheart, I've asked that question for 40 years, and it still mocks me. He laughed politely, then picked up a pair of aluminum size 8 needles, weighing them like he expected them to hum with ancient power. They didn't. They felt like danger. Still, he tossed them into his basket. The bet. This was what losing looked like. His coworker, Sandra Trenton, had grinned like a comic book villain when he agreed to their New Year's challenge. Whoever loses chooses a resolution for the other person. He'd lost by 7 minutes. 7 stupid minutes because he stopped to help a guy whose grocery bag split in the parking lot. Sandra had declared her resolution immediately, with triumphant flair. You'll join my grandmother's knitting group at the library. Every Thursday. For at least the first 3 months. He'd blinked. Knitting. Yes, knitting. With needles. And yarn. And judgment. Brandon had laughed. A real laugh. From the gut. Surprising even himself. Okay. Sounds fun. She just stared at him, baffled. Apparently, men were supposed to squirm at the idea of learning something whimsical. But the truth was, new hobbies didn't scare him. He'd spent years building them like scaffolding around the parts of his life that used to feel hollow. Jogging, cooking, photography, woodworking. A few more he couldn't even remember trying. None of them had magically solved anything, but each one stitched him back together a little. Knitting wouldn't be the weirdest addition to his list. He tossed 2 skeins of yarn into the basket. Navy blue, safe, unassuming, unlikely to get him roasted on day 1, and headed for the checkout. The next morning, he slipped into the office quietly, as he always did after the gym. His coworkers already buzzed around the open-plan space like caffeinated bees. Brandon preferred to observe the hive rather than join it. Before he even got to his desk, Sandra popped up from behind a monitor like a startled meerkat. Oh good, she said, narrowing her eyes. You're here. That's usually how mornings work. He set his bag down. You didn't try to get out of it last night, did you? Out of what? The knitting group. Brandon blinked. Why would I try to get out of it? Her face scrunched. Because men always have an angle. Do they? My friends insist that a man with no red flags is the biggest red flag. Brandon chuckled. That sounds exhausting. It is, she muttered, then pointed at him. So you really went to buy your stuff? He lifted the craft store bag. Sandra stared at it like it contained radioactive material. You actually did it. You sound disappointed, he teased. I'm not disappointed, she countered too quickly. I'm confused, he shrugged. You made the rules. I'm just honoring the bet. That's the confusing part, she whispered, more to herself. Then louder, don't embarrass my grandmother. I'll do my best. Sandra narrowed her eyes suspiciously, as though his lack of defensiveness was an act she couldn't decipher. Then she shook her head, muttered something about implausible men, and retreated to her desk. Brandon smiled to himself. The banter with her was one of the few office amusements he enjoyed. She was competitive in the way smart people often were. Sharp-witted, quick-tongued, always trying to read him like a plot twist she didn't see coming. Her cynicism was a shield, but he respected that. Everybody had their armor. He hadn't always had his. On lunch break, he sat alone at a small table by the window, eating a turkey wrap, when an old memory crept in. The kind that didn't hurt anymore but tapped politely, asking to be acknowledged. Mandy, his college sweetheart, his impulsive bride, his 8-month whirlwind that crashed just as quickly as it began. He remembered their elopement, the adrenaline, the laughter, the certainty that love conquered logic. He remembered being 22 and believing life unfolded like a Shakespeare play, where passion erased consequences and lovers learned everything at the end. They'd learned, all right. She liked attention. She liked the chase. Being married closed a door she still wanted open, even if she didn't walk through it. When he'd asked her, gently, honestly, whether she still intended to be married in truth rather than title, she'd sighed like he'd asked her to give up oxygen. He didn't fight. He didn't yell. He simply listened to the answer she couldn't hide. Filing for dissolution had felt like setting down a weight he didn't know he was carrying. But watching her sign the papers without hesitation, that had been a different kind of lesson. No begging. No bargaining. No tears. She just wanted out. And he got a front row seat to questioning his own judgment for years. But pain ages, and eventually it becomes wisdom if you let it. Brandon had let it. At 6:45 p.m., he walked into the downtown library's small community room. The sound hit him first, A chorus of overlapping voices, warm, sharp, amused. 5 older women sat in a semicircle, surrounded by baskets of yarn like a pastel fort. They all stopped talking the moment he stepped in. An elegant silver-haired woman gasped. Sandra wasn't lying. There is a man. Another woman elbowed her. Don't sound so shocked. Men are allowed to have hobbies. Yes, but they usually choose hobbies that involve electricity. A third chimed in. Brandon lifted a hand. Hi, I'm Brandon. I lost a bet. Bless him, said the smallest woman, already patting an empty chair. Sit, dear. I'm Doris. That's Lorraine, Betty, Clarice, and Jean. We're the Knit Wits. He grinned. Best group name I've ever heard. Flattery, Betty said. We'll get you everywhere. Now show us what yarn you chose. He held up the navy skeins. The women nodded approvingly. Good, safe color, Doris said. Won't fight back. Unlike Clarice's neon green phase, Jean added. Clarice sniffed. It was vibrant. It was radioactive, Jean corrected. The room erupted in laughter. Brandon relaxed a little. He wasn't sure what he'd expected. Stern instruction? Judgment? Perhaps. But instead he found a strange, cozy chaos. These women had been knitting together for decades, finishing each other's comments with the precision of a comedy troupe. Doris motioned him closer. Have you ever held knitting needles before? Only at the store. They didn't attack me. Yet, Lorraine said ominously. The lesson began. Brandon tried to mimic Doris's movements, holding the needles correctly, looping the yarn, casting on stitches, but his hands felt like uncoordinated rubber. His first attempt was a knot resembling a tiny blue spider having a nervous breakdown. That's unique, Betty said delicately. It's modern art, Clarice declared. Frame it. Brandon laughed at himself. I'm assuming this is not correct? Oh no, Doris said cheerfully. It's absolutely terrible. But so were we when we learned. His shoulders loosened at her honesty. Jean snapped a photo with her phone. Smile. Sandra will never believe this otherwise. Brandon chuckled. She really didn't think I'd show up, huh? Oh, sweetheart, Doris said, patting his arm. She's still convinced you're planning an escape route. Am I giving off flight risk energy? He asked. No, Clarice said. You're giving off man who doesn't run from accountability, which is frankly suspicious. He laughed again, louder this time. The absurdity, the warmth, the sheer unpredictability of the situation. It was perfect. And for the first time in a long time, he felt the thrilling, ridiculous sense that life was nudging him toward a new chapter he didn't see coming. When he left the library, stepping into the crisp night air, Brandon felt something he hadn't expected. Excitement. Not about knitting, it would clearly require divine intervention, but about the unpredictability of it all. The bet he'd lost had given him something oddly hopeful. Maybe he wasn't just adding a new hobby. Chapter 2, The Knit Wits and Their Unexpected New Member. Brandon arrived 10 minutes early for the second meeting, partly out of politeness, partly because he wasn't sure how long it would take him to psych himself up to walk through the door again. The first session had been fun, chaotic, judgmental in the way only affectionate older women could get away with, and full of laughter. But showing up again made it real. He had officially become a man who knitted on Thursday nights. The library was quiet, the kind of peaceful hush that made even his footsteps feel like they needed a volume adjustment. He reached room B before the Knit Wits arrived, so he took a moment to look around. Beige walls, beige carpet, beige folding chairs. The only pop of color came from a small bulletin board covered in flyers advertising everything from creative writing workshops to a Dungeons and Dragons group. He smiled. Libraries were a sanctuary for hobbies nobody understood. A voice behind him rasped, "You're early, dear. We don't usually get early." He turned to find Doris standing in the doorway, carrying 2 tote bags, one full of yarn, the other full of snacks. "Hi, Doris," she beamed. "You came back." "Of course I did." "Good." She stepped inside and set her things down. "I told the girls you're dependable. They owe me $5 each. You were betting on me?" "Of course. We bet on everything around here." She adjusted her glasses, eyes gleaming with mischief. "Don't take it personally. We also bet on which one of us will die first. I lost that one." He raised an eyebrow. "Should I ask how that works?" "Don't." She waved him off. "It gets weird." Brandon laughed, and before he could say more, the rest of the Knit Wits stormed in like a yarn-wielding hurricane. "Aha!" Clarice pointed accusingly. "Doris was right. You did show up." "I told you," Doris said smugly. Betty set down her oversized bag and huffed. "Well, now I owe Doris $5. Again. She's a menace." Jean hung her coat. "We'll get her next time." "No you won't," Doris said sweetly. Lorraine slid into a chair and crossed her arms. "Show us your practice stitches." Brandon blinked. "Practice?" All 5 sets of eyes narrowed at him simultaneously. "You didn't practice?" Betty asked, horrified. "I didn't realize there was homework." Doris sighed dramatically. "Sweetheart, everything is homework. What did you do all week?" Clarice demanded. "Work, sleep, eat." "Weak excuses," Jean declared. Brandon chuckled and pulled out his bag. Look, I brought my yarn. Doris patted his shoulder. It's okay. We'll fix you. He wasn't sure whether to be reassured or concerned. Once everyone settled, Doris began the lesson, explaining casting on again. Brandon paid attention, he really did, but his fingers still refused to cooperate. Every time he thought he'd managed a stitch, something slipped off or tightened too much. After 20 minutes, his needle looked like it was wearing a very confused blue bracelet. Jean inspected it. This is better than last time. Really? He asked, hopeful. No, she said. But you tried, and that counts. The women cackled. Brandon shook his head, amused. I walked right into that. Oh yes you did, Doris said proudly. The conversation drifted as they all worked. The Knit Wits had mastered the ability to knit while gossiping, complaining, story sharing, and drinking tea all at once. Brandon, meanwhile, had to choose between breathing and stitching. So, Betty said casually, have you and Sandra always flirted like that? Brandon nearly dropped his needle. Flirted? We don't flirt. Lorraine scoffed. Oh honey, we have bifocals and we can still see the sparks. There are no sparks, Brandon insisted. Aha, Clara said. And I don't have arthritis. She doesn't, Jean whispered. She refuses to admit it. I heard that. Brandon held up his hands. Seriously, Sandra and I are just coworkers. You keep saying that, Doris said. But your face does something funny when you talk about her. My face does nothing. It does, she said. It softens. He blinked. That's just my face. The women exchanged a knowing look that said, sure, dear, whatever helps you sleep at night. Halfway through the session, the door cracked open and a head peeked in. Brandon recognized the dark waves of hair before he saw the face. Sandra. Betty elbowed Doris so hard the older woman almost fell out of her chair. Sandra stepped inside cautiously, like she expected a trap to spring the moment she crossed the threshold. Hi, everyone. Grandma. Ladies. Brandon. Her eyes flicked to his yarn. You're knitting. Attempting to, he corrected. He's terrible, Jean said helpfully. He's improving, Doris countered. Slightly. Sandra walked farther in, hands clasped behind her back. She was trying very hard to look casual, but she was wearing her interrogation expression, the one she used at work when someone filed a spreadsheet wrong. I was in the area, she said. Liar, Clarice muttered. Sandra shot her a glare. I was sort of in the area. Still lying, Betty said. Brandon chuckled. Why'd you drop by? Sandra opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Just wanted to see how you were doing. The Knit Wits collectively gasped like an audience watching a scandalous plot twist. Brandon smiled softly. I'm doing okay. Better, now that you're here. Sandra's eyes widened slightly, caught off guard by his sincerity. Well, good. That's good. He held up his tangled yarn. Although, as you can see, I'm not a natural. She stepped closer to inspect the mess. It looks like abstract fiber art. Thank you, he said. That was not a compliment. He grinned, still taking it. The Knit Wits watched the exchange as though it were their favorite soap opera. Doris clapped her hands. Sandra, darling, sit. We'll teach you too. Sandra recoiled. Oh no, 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 no. I'm just here for 10 minutes. You'll stay 30, Clarice predicted ominously. 5, Sandra countered. 50, Betty argued. Sandra sighed and reluctantly took a seat. 10 minutes later, she was laughing at something Jean said. 15 minutes after that, she was holding yarn like it was a foreign alien substance. 20 minutes in, she leaned closer to Brandon without realizing it. And by the 30-minute mark, when she jumped up claiming she really had to go, everyone, including herself, knew she'd actually enjoyed it. At the door, she turned back toward Brandon. Good job for coming back. Good job dropping by, he said. She hesitated. I might, maybe, stop by again next week. You're welcome anytime. Her cheeks colored faintly before she slipped out. The door hadn't even fully closed before the Knit Wits exploded. Oh, she likes you, Doris sang. She more than likes him, Jean said. She came all the way down here to stare at him, knitting like a confused baby deer, Betty added. Brandon shook his head, embarrassed and amused all at once. Guys, come on. You come on. Clarice fired back. We're experts. Lorraine pointed at him with her knitting needle. If you don't ask that girl on a proper date soon, we will. Brandon laughed. Please don't. No promises, Doris said. By the time he left the library, he had learned exactly 3 things. He still couldn't knit. Sandra had appeared for no reason she was willing to admit. And the Knit Wits were plotting something. Yet as he walked to his car, he felt lighter. Like the weight of old memories had been replaced by something softer. Something warmer. Hope, maybe. Or possibility. Or simply the absurd delight of finding himself adopted by 5 elderly women who believed, with absolute certainty, that he and Sandra were the next great romantic saga. He didn't know if they were right. Chapter 3: Office Tension and Curiosity. Brandon arrived at work on Monday with a feeling he hadn't had in a long time. anticipation. Not for the job itself, which involved spreadsheets, project timelines, and the occasional emergency meeting about absolutely nothing. No, he felt anticipation because Sandra would inevitably ask how Thursday went. Since she'd actually shown up halfway through last week's knitting group, he didn't have to wonder whether she cared. She absolutely did. She just didn't want to admit it. And Brandon found something unexpectedly charming about her refusal to be obvious. He hung his coat and walked toward his desk. The moment he reached his chair, he felt eyes on him. Correction, one pair of eyes. Sandra stood just outside her cubicle, coffee mug in hand, leaning against the wall like she'd been waiting for him. "You're late," she said. "It's 8:29. That's late for you." He wasn't sure whether she was teasing or interrogating. "Traffic." He sat down. "Did you need something?" "Yes," she said, then paused. No. Maybe." He grinned. "Sandra, you're doing the confusing thing again." She pointed her mug at him defensively. "I am perfectly clear." "Okay," he said, folding his hands. "Ask me the question you've been rehearsing since Thursday night." "I'm not." She stopped, then sighed, then surrendered. "Fine. How was the group?" "After I left." He shrugged casually. "Same as before. They roasted me. I survived." She frowned. "Grandma wasn't too hard on you?" "Your grandmother is delightful. Terrifying, but delightful." Sandra snorted. "That tracks." He tilted his head. "You really didn't expect me to stick with it?" "No, absolutely not." "Why?" "Because," she gestured at him. "You're you." "That's not an answer." "It is," she insisted. "You're the type of guy who jogs before work, stays calm in office chaos, and doesn't seem rattled by anything. Men like that don't usually sign up to be heckled by 5 senior citizens wielding knitting needles. I'm full of surprises." "That's the problem," she muttered. "Surprises make me nervous." Before he could unpack that, their department head called out, "Team meeting in 5. Sandra groaned and pushed off the wall. "We'll finish this later." He watched her walk away, noticing the slight stiffness in her posture, the kind that suggested she was thinking far more than she wanted to. The meeting, like all Monday meetings, was useless. A roundtable of updates that could have been an email, accompanied by the usual chorus of passive-aggressive sighs. Brandon sat quietly, contributing when necessary, observing the rhythm of the room. Sandra sat diagonally across from him, pretending to take notes but actually watching him from beneath her lashes. Anytime he looked her way, she immediately redirected her gaze with suspicious intensity toward the projector screen. Halfway through the meeting, she sent him a message on the team chat system. "Sandra, are you taking this seriously?" Brandon, "As seriously as the subject matter warrants." Sandra, "So not seriously at all." Brandon, "Correct." Sandra, "Stop trying to make me laugh." Brandon, "I haven't said a thing." Sandra, "Your face is saying things." He tried not to smile. It didn't work. When the meeting finally ended, Sandra practically bolted from her seat. He caught up to her in the hallway. "You okay?" he asked. Yes. Why wouldn't I be?" You sprinted out like the room was on fire. "It was metaphorically on fire." Brandon chuckled. "Really?" "Yes. Burned by monotony." "So dramatic." "Don't judge me." She crossed her arms. "I'm allowed to be dramatic." "I didn't say you weren't. I said you were dramatic." She glared at him, but her eyes sparkled just slightly. "You're doing that thing again." "What thing?" "Being unflappable." "That bothers you?" "No," she said. Then added, "Yes." Then added again, "Maybe." And finally, "I don't know." He raised an eyebrow. "Sandra." "What?" "You're thinking too much." "I always think too much. Try thinking a little less." "Impossible." He smiled. "Try anyway." She opened her mouth to retort, but was interrupted by her phone buzzing. She pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and groaned. "It's Grandma," she said. "Everything okay?" "She sent me a picture." Sandra turned the phone toward him. It was a photo of him, mid-stitch, brows furrowed in absolute concentration while Doris pointed at his yarn like a drill sergeant. He laughed. "I remember that moment." She captioned it, "Your boy is improving." He blinked. "Your boy?" Sandra covered her face with her hand. "She's out of control. I think she's adorable." "You would." Sandra pocketed her phone. "Grandma says you're a good listener." "That's kind of her." "And that you're polite." "I try." "And that you're patient." "I've been told." "And that you have forearms worthy of a Hallmark male lead." Brandon blinked. "She said that." Verbatim. He tried to resist, but laughter broke out of him, nearly doubling him over. Sandra scowled. "Don't enjoy this." "Oh, I'm enjoying this." "Grandma doesn't need encouragement." "I'm honored she approves of my forearms." Sandra threw her hands up. "I'm leaving." "Please don't." "Then stop smiling." "Can't." "Ugh." She stormed off. Or tried to. Her storming had a noticeable lack of conviction. Later that afternoon, Brandon sat alone in the break room, reheating leftover pasta. He hummed quietly to himself, still amused by the idea of Doris analyzing his forearms like casting material. The microwave beeped. He pulled out his container and sat by the window. Sandra appeared 2 minutes later. She didn't sit across from him. She sat next to him. That was new. She took a sip from her water bottle. So, did you actually practice this weekend? I did. Her eyebrows lifted. Really? Really? I found a YouTube tutorial. I got as far as casting on and 1 row. How did it go? Disastrously. She snorted. Figures. But I'm learning. She studied him quietly. Why are you actually trying? He blinked. Because I gave my word. And because it's fun. Fun. She looked skeptical. For you? Yes. She leaned back in her chair. You're something else, Brandon. He twirled his fork. Is that a compliment? It's an observation. He tilted his head. Sandra. You know you can compliment people, right? She huffed. I compliment people all the time. Name one time you complimented me. I said your scarf like blob was interesting. That was not a compliment. It was supportive. It was diplomatic. Same thing. He laughed. Not at all. She stared at him, an unreadable expression flickering across her face. Finally, she said softly, okay, fine. You're surprisingly decent. That's the best you can do? Yes. He nudged her shoulder gently. I'll take it. She exhaled. Brandon. Yeah. Don't make this weird. I'm not making it weird. You're making it weird. You're projecting. She glared again, cheeks pinkening. Stop being unflappable. Not a chance. She shook her head, defeated. Thursday, she said abruptly. What about it? I might come again. To the knitting group? Yeah. I'd like that. Her eyes darted away, embarrassed by her own honesty. I'm only coming to make sure Grandma isn't planning something. Of course. And to make sure you don't embarrass me. I'll try not to. And to supervise your stitches. I'll prepare myself. And, Sandra. She froze. Yes. You don't need an excuse. She blinked. He smiled. Sandra looked at him for a long moment, her expression difficult to read. Then she stood, straightened her blouse and said quietly, see you Thursday. She walked away before he could say another word. Brandon watched her go, feeling a slow warmth spreading through him. It wasn't dramatic or overwhelming, just steady, like something beginning to take shape, stitch by stitch. Chapter 4A Drop-In, a disaster, and a dinner invitation. Brandon arrived at the library Thursday evening feeling a mixture of calm and anticipation. His knitting had not improved since the weekend. He'd practiced twice, both times ending with some alarming not that even YouTube couldn't diagnose. But he had showed up, and that had to count for something. He pushed open the community room door. The Knit Wits were already mid-debate. No, Betty, you absolutely cannot knit a cat sweater for a cat that hates you, Clara said. Betty huffed. Muffin doesn't hate me. He scratched you so hard last week I thought you'd need stitches, Jean pointed out. That was affection, Betty lied. Doris noticed Brandon and lit up. Ah, our star pupil. The other 4 turned and greeted him with the same chaotic warmth as always. Waves, teasing mock horror that he'd come back again. I practiced, Brandon said proudly, pulling out his project bag. Lorraine took it, inspected it, and squinted. Sweetheart, what is this? A scarf. Eventually. It looks like it's trying to become 2 scarves at once, Jean observed. That's called ambition, Clarice added. Brandon laughed and sank into his usual chair. I'm getting there. Slowly, Doris added, patting his knee. But you are getting there. They had just begun the evening's lesson when the door opened. But it didn't creak open the way it had the week before. This time it burst open. Sandra stood in the doorway, slightly out of breath, hair wind-tousled, eyes bright like she jogged across the parking lot. I'm not late, she said, even though no one had asked. Every Knit Wit paused mid-stitch. Then Betty whispered, not softly at all. Oh my goodness, she dressed nice for him. I did not dress nice, Sandra snapped. This is just clothes. Brandon's eyes traveled discreetly. Dark jeans, a burgundy top, boots. It was casual. It was ordinary. It was also absolutely undeniably dressed nice. He swallowed the smile threatening to surface. Hey Sandra. She cleared her throat. Hi, Grandma. Doris beamed. Hello, dear. Sandra moved to the empty chair beside Brandon, though there were 3 others available. Her grandmother noticed, so did the Knit Wits. Clarice elbowed Betty. Betty elbowed Jean. Jean elbowed Lorraine. Lorraine elbowed everyone back. Subtle was not their brand. The meeting resumed, and the Knit Wits, normally content with friendly chatter, became silent, eyes darting between Sandra and Brandon like spectators at a tennis match. Brandon lifted his needles, trying not to feel self-conscious. He botched his first stitch. Sandra watched him. You're holding the needle wrong. No, he isn't, Doris protested. He's holding it uniquely. Wrong, Sandra repeated. Brandon grinned. Show me. She scooted closer, lifting his hands gently. Too gently, as if trying not to make a big deal out of touching him. Her fingers adjusted his grip, steady and warm. "There," she said. "Try now." He cast on a stitch that was, shockingly, not terrible. The Knit Wits gasped like the moment was romantic, historical, or both. Brandon murmured, "You're good at this." Sandra sat back quickly, trying to disguise her flustered expression. "I'm good at giving instructions, not at doing it myself." "That's a skill," he said softly. She didn't look at him, but he saw the hint of a smile. 20 minutes into the session, disaster struck. Specifically, a rogue ball of yarn. Jean had been rummaging through her tote bag when a lavender skein shot out like a cannonball, rolled across the floor, and collided with the leg of Sandra's chair. Her chair wobbled. She grabbed the table for balance. The table, unfortunately, was not prepared for this level of responsibility. Her water bottle tipped, rolled, and spilled directly across Brandon's pattern sheet, soaking the paper and half his yarn. "Oh no," Sandra gasped. "Oh dear," Doris echoed. "Oh boy," Clara said, delighted. Brandon lifted the dripping yarn. "Well, that's a new texture." "I'm so sorry." Sandra grabbed napkins from the snack table and started patting his project with frantic determination. "I didn't mean to. This is... Oh my God, your scarf is drowning." "It's fine," Brandon chuckled. "It is not fine." She dabbed faster. "I killed your project." "You didn't kill it. You hydrated it." "Brandon." He laughed harder. She glared harder. Doris stepped in. "Dear, stop scrubbing. You're going to felt the poor boy's stitches." Sandra froze mid-dab. "I don't even know what that means." "It means," Betty said, "that you two should take a break." "A break," Sandra echoed. "Yes," Doris said, shooing them toward the hallway. "Go. Get some fresh air. Dry the yarn. Talk about your feelings." "Grandma," Sandra sputtered. "What? I'm old. I say what I want." With no real way to argue without causing more chaos, Sandra and Brandon stepped into the hallway. Sandra rubbed her forehead. "They're unbelievable." "They're invested," Brandon said with a shrug. "In what? Us?" He smiled slightly. "Maybe. There is no us." "There could be." She stared at him, startled. "Are you serious? Are you?" Her breath hitched. "Brandon, I didn't come here for that." "Why did you come?" Sandra opened her mouth, then closed it, then said very quietly, "I don't know." He stepped closer. Not too close, just enough to make her look up. "It's okay not to know." She exhaled shakily. "I'm not used to people like you." "People like me?" "People who don't play games." He tilted his head. "Do you wish I did?" "No," she said instantly, eyes softening. "But it scares me." "Why?" "Because when things are easy," she whispered, "I start waiting for the moment they stop being easy." He nodded slowly. "Sandra, I don't want anything from you. I just like being around you. That's it." She swallowed. "You're too reasonable." "I get that a lot." She laughed. Quiet, genuine, unguarded. He felt that laugh like a warmth in his chest. After a moment, she cleared her throat. I owe you dinner." "You don't owe me anything. I spilled water all over your project. That's at least, I don't know, tacos?" He grinned. "I'd love tacos." She blinked. "Really? Really? Okay," she said, almost shy. "After the meeting?" "After the meeting." When they returned to the room, the Knit Wits looked at them like they'd been gone for hours rather than minutes. "Feelings resolved?" Doris asked. "Grandma, I swear." "We merely stepped out," Brandon interrupted. Betty raised an eyebrow. "Stepping out is chapter 3 of any good romance." "Stop," Sandra begged. Clara smirked. "We will not." Doris clapped her hands. "Well, now that the dramatic break is over, let's get back to knitting." Brandon reclaimed his soggy yarn and crooked stitches. Sandra sat beside him again, closer this time, not commenting on it. Their shoulders brushed. Neither pulled away. After the meeting, they walked to the parking lot together under a sky dripping with stars. "So," Sandra said, hands buried in her pockets, "Tacos? Tacos. I know a place down the street. It's small, kind of weird, but good." "Weird and good describes most of my hobbies," he said. She smiled. "Yeah, I guess it does." They reached his car. Sandra hesitated. "Brandon, yeah, thanks for not teasing me too much. I like you better unflustered," he said, then added with a grin, "most of the time." She rolled her eyes, but her smile didn't fade. "Let's go eat." They got into their separate cars, headlights flicking on almost in sync, and pulled out of the lot. Brandon didn't know what tonight meant, but he knew it meant something, and that was enough. Chapter 5. Brandon's past. Sandra's walls. Brandon had always liked Friday evenings. Not for any glamorous reason. He didn't party, didn't bar hop, and his idea of nightlife was getting takeout noodles and reading on the couch. Fridays simply felt like a pause, a moment where the noise of the week finally loosened its grip. This Friday felt different. He was thinking about tacos. Specifically, the accidental not a date taco dinner he'd shared with Sandra after the knitting group. They'd sat across from each other in a tiny taqueria with rattling ceiling fans and handwritten menu boards. They talked, really talked, in a way he hadn't since his early 20s. She'd looked at him like she was studying him, trying to find the flaw she was certain must exist. He'd looked at her like he was learning a new language. Now, hours later, he still replayed pieces of that evening. The moment she'd laughed. The moment she'd looked nervous. The moment she'd admitted she didn't know why she had come to the library at all. Brandon leaned against his kitchen counter, sipping a glass of water, considering how surreal his life had become. He was 33, divorced once, steady and stable by most definitions, and yet somehow showing up to a knitting group had thrown his world back into motion. He didn't mind. Motion meant growth. His phone buzzed. A text from Sandra. "Did your yarn survive?" He smiled, typing back. "Barely. It shows signs of emotional trauma, but it pulls through, much like me." A moment later. "So you're admitting you're dramatic?" Only when soaked unexpectedly. He imagined her rolling her eyes at her phone. Then another message appeared. "Thank you again. For not making fun of me last night. Too much anyway." He typed, "I wasn't trying to make fun of you." Then hesitated before adding, "I liked spending time with you, Sandra." There was a longer pause this time. He could picture her staring at her phone, debating whether feelings were traps or stepping stones. Then, "Me too." Brandon set his phone down slowly, letting the warmth settle in his chest. On Monday, Sandra arrived at work looking like she'd spent the weekend alternating between overthinking and pretending she wasn't overthinking. Her friends in the office, two women from accounting who seemed to run their social lives on gossip and cold brew, cornered her near the elevator. "So," one said, grinning, "we heard you went to the knitting group again." Sandra froze. "Grandma talks too much." And the other prompted, "Was he there?" "There's no he," Sandra lied. Her friends stared at her. "You're glowing," said the first. "I'm not glowing." "You absolutely are." Sandra glared at the floor. "It was just tacos. With a man. With a coworker. With a man." She huffed. "We're not whatever you think we are." Her friends exchanged that look. The one women give when they know their friend is lying to herself. "You should be careful," one of them warned gently. "Men without red flags can be the worst kind. Harder to read." Sandra nodded stiffly. "I know." But the moment the elevator opened, she let out a slow breath. Harder to read didn't mean dangerous. It just meant unfamiliar. When she entered her department, she nearly collided with Brandon coming out of the copy room. He steadied her automatically. "Morning." "Oh." Her voice cracked slightly. "Hi. You okay?" "Yes. No. Maybe. I don't know." She passed him quickly. "Don't ask." He followed her to her cubicle doorway. "Sandra, you're doing the thing," she said, pointing accusingly. "What thing?" The calm observing thing. "It's unnerving." He laughed. "Okay, I'll look away." "You're still doing it." He raised both hands. "I'm just existing in your vicinity. I can't help the rest." Sandra glared at him, then sighed, defeated, sinking into her chair. "I don't know how to act around you." "Why?" "Because you're..." She gestured vaguely. You've said that before," he said gently. "But you've never explained it." "Because you're stable," she blurted. "And normal. And emotionally aware. And that's bad. It's suspicious." He blinked. "Suspicious?" "Yes. Because that means you're either genuinely that good or secretly terrible. I'm trying to figure out which." Brandon leaned against her cubicle wall. "Sandra, I'm not perfect. I'm just not pretending." She looked at him for a long moment. Then, quietly, she asked, "What happened with your marriage? The real version. Not the polite one." Brandon inhaled slowly. He'd expected the question eventually, but hearing it still stirred an old ache. Not sharp, just distant. "I was 22, he said. "Too young. Too idealistic. Mandy and I thought we were soulmates because we liked the same music and stayed up late talking." Sandra nodded, listening. "We eloped on a whim. No plan, no preparation. Felt romantic at the time. Like a movie." He smiled faintly. "But life isn't a movie. It's harder. And more honest." "What happened?" she asked softly. "She liked attention," he said without bitterness. "Not cheating, but flirting. A lot. I wasn't comfortable with it. I didn't want to control her. I just wanted a partnership. And she didn't? She didn't want boundaries," he said simply. When she realized being married meant respecting them, she got restless. Sandra's brows furrowed. "She didn't fight for it?" "No," Brandon said. "And I didn't want to beg someone to stay, so I filed for dissolution." She signed the papers in 10 minutes. Sandra flinched. "That must have hurt." "It did," he admitted. "Not because she left. Because I realized I'd ignored what I didn't want to see. Love shouldn't require blindness." Sandra didn't speak for a long moment. Finally, she whispered, "That explains a lot." "How so?" "You have rules," she said. "Real ones. About respect. About honesty. And those bother you?" "They scare me," she corrected. "Because I've only ever dated guys who were predictable in their inconsistency." Being with someone who knows what they want. That's new. Brandon sat on the edge of her desk, not blocking her, just close enough to be present. Sandra, he said quietly. I'm not asking for anything. She looked up, eyes searching his. I like spending time with you, he continued. I like your sarcasm. I like your fire. I like that you overthink everything because it means you care. She swallowed. I don't want to mess this up. There's nothing to mess up, he said gently. We're not rushing anything. But what if? Stop trying to predict the ending, Brandon said with a soft smile. Let it be what it is. Sandra stared at him. Then, in a small voice, said, I don't know how to do that. I can help, he said. If you want. She exhaled shakily. Okay, maybe. He nodded. No pressure. Her lips twitched. You're annoyingly reasonable. Thank you. That wasn't a compliment. It felt like one. A tiny laugh escaped her. And for the first time that day, she looked lighter. That evening, Brandon sat at home knitting or attempting to, anyway. His stitches were uneven, his tension chaotic, but he found the process strangely meditative. The rhythm helped him think without spiraling. He thought about Sandra, about her defenses, her intelligence, her humor, her fear of the good things, her courage in spite of that fear. He liked her, not a little, not casually, but he could wait. Some people needed patience the way yarn needed gentle tension to hold shape. Too tight and it snapped, too loose and it unraveled. He wasn't going to snap or unravel anything. The doorbell rang. He frowned, he wasn't expecting anyone. Setting his yarn aside, he opened the door. Sandra stood there, arms crossed, looking like she'd walked straight from her car before talking herself out of it. Hi, she said. Hi, he echoed, pleasantly surprised. Everything okay? No. Yes. She groaned softly. Can I come in? Of course. She stepped inside, glancing around like she wasn't sure what she was looking for. Finally, she blurted, I don't want to be scared of this. He blinked. Of? You, she said. This, whatever we are. I don't want to overthink it. He gave her a warm, steady smile. Okay. But I'm really bad at not overthinking. That's okay too. She held up a bag of takeout. I brought food, as a peace offering, to my own anxiety. He laughed. Accepted. She let out a breath, shoulders loosening. And, maybe we can talk? Absolutely. She walked farther into the living room and sat on his couch, hands twisting nervously. Brandon sat beside her, close, but not crowding. Sandra looked at him, eyes uncertain but brave. Brandon, she said quietly. Yeah, don't let me sabotage this. He reached for her hand, not grabbing, just offering. She took it. I won't, he said softly. But you won't either. We'll figure it out together. Sandra nodded, a tremor of relief passing through her. And in that small, quiet moment, stitched between two people who had lived very different hurts, something real began to take shape. Something steady, something warm, something neither of them needed to run from. Chapter 6 Knit Wits Intervention. Operation pushed them together. The following Thursday, Brandon entered the library with a strange new tension in his chest. Not nerves, exactly. More like potential. Like turning a doorknob slowly and knowing something interesting waited on the other side. He wondered if Sandra would show up again. She hadn't promised she would, but she also hadn't promised she wouldn't. And somehow, with Sandra, those two things meant wildly different emotional climates. As he approached room B, he heard whispers. Low, urgent, conspiratorial. He hesitated, listening. Doris, we need a plan. Clarice, a real one this time. Not the accidentally spilled tea plan. That backfired. Jean, how was I supposed to know the tea was boiling? Betty, we need subtlety. Lorraine, we are not subtle. Brandon pushed the door open slowly. 5 heads whipped toward him. 5 identical innocent smiles appeared. Brandon, Doris said brightly. You're early again. How responsible. Hi, he said, narrowing his eyes. What's going on? Nothing, they all said in perfect unison. That was the least reassuring answer imaginable. Brandon sat down. Okay, what are you plotting now? We don't plot, Betty said. We scheme, Clarice corrected. Ladies, Doris said, clapping once. Focus. Sandra will be here in approximately. She checked her watch. 8 minutes. You timed her arrival? Brandon asked, half horrified and half impressed. She is startlingly consistent, Doris said. We're using the data we have, Jean added. He rubbed his forehead. Please tell me you haven't created a chart. They all looked away. Doris cleared her throat. We don't need charts to know destiny. Oh God, Brandon muttered. Lorraine leaned over. Relax, sweetheart. We're helping fate along, not forcing it. He frowned. I don't think fate needs help. Fate always needs help, Clarice said. It's terrible with schedules. Before he could question that logic, the doorknob rattled. Sandra stepped inside. The Knit Wits straightened like royalty was entering the room. Sandra glanced around suspiciously. Why do you all look like you swallowed secrets? Secrets, Doris repeated innocently. We are but humble knitters. Sandra's eyes narrowed. Then she looked at Brandon. You look guilty. I didn't do anything, he said quickly. Yet, she huffed and sat beside him, closer than previous weeks. Close enough that when their shoulders brushed, neither moved away. Doris clasped her hands. All right, ladies and gentlemen, tonight is special. Oh no, Sandra whispered. Oh yes, Jean said. Betty stood dramatically. Tonight, we begin a new project. A project of connection. Sandra looked alarmed. That sounds like a cult slogan. It's knitting related, Clara said. Mostly. Doris pointed at two small baskets on the table. Pair projects. Brandon blinked. Pair projects. Yes, Doris said proudly. Two people work on one item. It teaches teamwork and communication. Lorraine added, and reveals compatibility. Sandra's face contorted. Absolutely not. Absolutely yes, Betty countered. We already paired everyone. Brandon held up a hand. Just to be clear, who am I paired? Why? You, Doris declared, are paired with Sandra. Sandra slapped her forehead. Of course I am. Brandon tried to fight a smile and failed. Sandra noticed and jabbed him with her elbow. Don't enjoy this. I can't help it. Doris pushed the basket toward them. You two will make a scarf. Half each. Meeting in the middle. That's symbolic, Jean whispered dramatically. Stop narrating. Sandra groaned. Brandon chuckled and opened the basket. Inside were two colors of yarn, navy blue and burgundy. He lifted a brow at the women. Did you choose our colors based on our clothes? We absolutely did, Doris said. Brandon looked at Sandra. It's a nice shade of burgundy. Don't try to charm me, she warned. Is it working? No, he smiled. It's working a little. She glared at him again, but her cheeks warmed. They got to work. Painful, awkward, comedic work. Brandon's stitches, while earnest, were chaotic. Sandra's stitches were technically better but hilarious in their own right. She knitted too tightly, creating a fabric so stiff it could stand on its own. I think I made a weapon, Sandra said, examining her rigid rectangle. This could absolutely injure someone. Useful for self-defense, Brandon offered. This is not a compliment. It's a little bit a compliment. She tried to hide her smile. The Knit Wits circled them like sharks waiting for romantic blood in the water. Doris bent over their project. You two look adorable working together. We look stressed, Sandra corrected. Stress can be adorable, Betty said. Clarice tapped Brandon's shoulder. Your stitches are getting better. Really? He asked, hopeful. No, she said. But your posture is. Jean stepped in. Turn toward her more. Betty added. Lean in a bit. Lorraine whispered. Pretend you're in a movie. Sandra groaned. Grandma, I swear. Hush, Doris said. We're busy nudging destiny. Brandon laughed. Ladies, please let us knit. We're letting you knit, Clarice said. We're just judging your technique. And your chemistry, Jean added. Sandra dropped her forehead to the table. Please let lightning strike me. Not in the library, Doris scolded. The sprinkler system would ruin our yarn. An hour into the chaos, a small miracle happened. Brandon and Sandra started laughing. Real laughing. Unrestrained and unguarded. At first at themselves, then at each other, then at the ridiculous scarf that now had two distinctly different textures. This looks like two people arguing in yarn form, Sandra said. Brandon nodded. Yarn therapy. Yarn dysfunction. Yarn marriage counseling. Sandra snorted. Yarn divorce. He wiggled his eyebrows. I've lived that. She laughed harder. The Knit Wits froze, staring at the pair like birdwatchers spotting a rare nesting ritual. Doris whispered loudly, It's happening. Lorraine nodded in awe. The bonding. Clarice fist pumped. Operation Push Them Together is working. Sandra nearly choked. You named the operation? Betty shrugged. We like themes. Brandon shook his head and patted Sandra's hand. Welcome to Thursday nights. She stared at their joined hands for a half-second too long before pulling away delicately. She didn't seem annoyed. She seemed startled, like she'd felt something she wasn't ready to name. After the meeting, Sandra walked out with him again. The night air was mild, the kind of evening where things felt suspended between possibilities. Well, she said, I survived. You did more than survive. I humiliated myself. You laughed, he corrected. A lot. She frowned. I don't laugh a lot. You should. That's not how humor works. He gave her a warm look. Sandra. What? You had fun. She hesitated. Then, almost reluctantly, she nodded. Yeah, I did. They walked a little farther. Their pace matched. Their shoulders brushed again, lightly, like a question neither of them answered. At the parking lot, she stopped at her car. I want to say something, and I'm not going to say it well. Say it anyway. She tucked her hair behind her ear. Tonight, I didn't feel scared. He blinked. Scared of what? Of this, she said softly. Of you. Of liking you. His heart thumped once, deep and steady. Sandra, I'm not admitting anything, she said quickly. You just did. Don't start. I won't, he said gently. She looked at him, conflicted and hopeful all at once. You make things feel easy. I want them to be easy. And that terrifies me. I know. She inhaled, slow and shaky. But I don't want to run from it. Brandon leaned closer, just slightly, giving her every opportunity to step back. He didn't kiss her. He didn't touch her. He simply said, softly, good. Sandra let out a trembling breath, nodded once, and opened her car door. Before getting in, she mumbled, almost shyly, see you next week. He watched her drive away, and for the first time in years, he felt something rising in him, quiet, steady, hopeful, pattern forming, one row at a time. Chapter 7, the complication, not the X, but close. Brandon had never been someone who lived in the past. Not anymore. Not since he'd learned what carrying old wounds could do, how it could warp your sense of self, make every new thing feel like a trap, make every new possibility feel temporary. He'd put those years behind him with intentional effort. But life, being the wry comedian it was, occasionally enjoyed handing out callbacks. His callback arrived on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. He was eating his lunch at the break room window seat, a turkey wrap, same as always, when his phone buzzed. He checked the screen. Mandy Wells, hey, do you have a minute? I'd like to talk if that's okay. He didn't freeze. It wasn't shock. It was more like hearing a song you used to know all the lyrics to but no longer connected with. He typed back, sure. Everything okay? Her reply was fast. Yes, nothing bad. Just wanted to catch up if you're open to it. Coffee? Brandon took a slow breath. This was not a crisis. This was a loose thread from a life long since outgrown. He texted, okay. At the cafe on 4th? 6 p.m.? Perfect. Thank you. He slipped his phone away and finished his lunch. No anxiety, just curiosity, and a little wariness, because life might have been a good teacher, but no one liked pop quizzes. Sandra noticed something was off the moment she passed his desk that afternoon. Brandon's usual calm had an undertone, subtle, quiet, but there, not tension, more like bracing. She halted beside him. What happened? He blinked up at her. What? You have that look. What look? The one you get when you're trying to look unbothered but your eye twitches. His eyebrow jumped. My eye is not twitching. It's twitch adjacent. He sighed. It's nothing. Brandon. Her voice softened. Come on. He debated for a split second. He didn't owe her an explanation. They weren't officially anything. But honesty felt right with her. Easy. Natural. Mandy texted, he said. Sandra's spine straightened instinctively. Your ex-wife Mandy? Yes. What did she want? To talk. Sandra stared at him with an unreadable expression. A mix of discomfort and forced neutrality. Oh, she said, too lightly to be natural. You going? Yes. Just coffee. She nodded quickly. Right. Sure. People do that. It's normal. He tilted his head a little. Are you okay? Yes. She lied too fast. Absolutely. Totally normal. This is fine. He smiled gently. It's really just closure stuff. No weird motives. I didn't say there were weird motives. You thought it. I didn't. She stopped. Maybe I did. He reached out and touched her wrist lightly. Careful, respectful. I'll tell you how it goes. Sandra swallowed. Okay. She left without another word. But her stormy expression lingered in his thoughts long after she disappeared around the corner. The cafe on 4th was small and warm, filled with the scent of roasted beans and pastries. Brandon arrived on time. Mandy was already there, seated in a corner booth, fingers curled around a mug of tea. She looked older, not in a bad way, just real. Less ethereal than the memory of her, less whimsical, more grounded. Her smile was gentle when she saw him. Hey, she said. Hey, he echoed, sliding into the seat across from her. You look good, she said. You too. They sat for a moment, the mild awkwardness fading as they eased into conversation. It wasn't painful. It wasn't charged. It was simply two people who had once shared something and had grown up since. I owe you an apology, Mandy said finally, pushing her mug aside. Brandon blinked. For what? For being a kid, she said. For not realizing how unprepared I was for marriage. For hurting you when you didn't deserve it. I never said that out loud. You don't have to apologize, Brandon said gently. We were young. Yes, she said. But you were honest with me. You were steady. You were good. I wasn't ready for any of it. He gave a soft, reflective smile. We both learned something. Did you? She asked. I did. I learned not to ignore red flags, even my own. That drew a short, surprised laugh out of her. I'm glad we're talking, she said. I'm getting married again. Brandon's brows lifted. Congratulations. Thank you. She hesitated. I just didn't want you to hear through someone else and think I didn't care enough to tell you. He nodded. That was fair. And, she added, I wanted to make sure you're okay, and that you're happy. I am, Brandon said truthfully. She studied his face. Is it a new someone? His thoughts flickered instantly to Sandra, to her stubbornness, her vulnerability, the way she looked at him like she wanted to trust him and was terrified of what that meant. Maybe, Brandon said softly. It's early. Mandy smiled. Whoever she is, I hope she knows what she's getting. He chuckled. I hope so too. This wasn't closure. Closure implied something was ending. This was simply life moving on without bitterness. They talked for another 10 minutes before parting with polite warmth. No lingering desire, no hidden agendas. Just two people who had grown in different directions. Sandra saw them, completely by accident. She'd been driving home from the office when she spotted Brandon's car outside the cafe. She wasn't the type to snoop. She wasn't jealous. She wasn't insecure. That was what she told herself. But when she saw Brandon through the window, laughing gently, relaxed in a way that suggested history, and saw the woman sitting across from him, beautiful in a nostalgic, familiar way, Sandra froze. She didn't go inside. She didn't eavesdrop. She just stood there long enough to feel something uncomfortable twist beneath her ribs. Then she walked away. By the time she reached her car, she was furious. Not at Brandon. Not at Mandy. At herself. Because she hated caring enough to react. Brandon texted her an hour later. Can I call you? Sandra took 5 minutes to answer. Sure. When he called, her voice was calm. Too calm. Hey, he said softly. It's done. How'd it go? Good, he said. Really good. Not in a romantic way. More like, two people who aren't 22 anymore. Sandra hummed politely. That's nice. You sure you're okay? I said I was. Your voice says otherwise. Brandon, she said. You don't have to explain anything to me. I want to. She went quiet. Mandy is getting married, he said. She just wanted to talk it out. That's all. Okay. And I wanted you to know there's nothing left between us. Another pause. Longer. Then a breathy, vulnerable whisper. I know. I just surprised myself. How so? I didn't think I'd feel anything, she said. Not jealousy. Not fear. Not whatever it was. It was stupid. It wasn't stupid. Yes, it was. No, he said gently. It meant you care. That's the problem, she said quietly. Caring is the dangerous part. Brandon leaned back on his couch, voice warm despite the distance. Sandra, caring isn't a trap. It has been for me, she whispered. Well, he said, I'm not going anywhere because your feelings exist. She let out a shaky exhale. You make it sound easy. It's not easy, he said. It's just honest. Another silence, but softer this time. Warmer. Brandon, she said quietly. Yeah. Did you tell her about me? He smiled. Yes. What did you say? That I might be interested in someone. Sandra's breath caught. And that it's early, he continued. But I hope it becomes something. She didn't answer for several seconds. Then gently, vulnerably, she said, I hope so too. They didn't say goodnight right away. They talked for another hour about everything and nothing. About fears. About trust. About being two people who didn't want to repeat their pasts. And when they finally hung up, Brandon lay back on the couch with the distinct realization that something had shifted again. Sandra wasn't running. Not anymore. She was still scared. Still uncertain. But she was leaning. And that was enough. The complication hadn't broken anything. It had shown them both what could be at stake. It had shown them why this mattered. Chapter 8 Truth, Courage and Yarn. The days leading up to Thursday felt different for both of them. For Sandra, the air felt charged, like walking around with static on her skin. She'd lie awake at night arguing with herself about everything she felt versus everything she was afraid of. Her friends at work noticed her distraction, and although she denied it with all the skill of a toddler hiding a stolen cookie, no one believed her. For Brandon, the feeling was gentler, warm, steady. Not naive hope, not fantasy, just anticipation. A feeling he hadn't allowed himself to experience in a long time. He practiced knitting once during the week and produced something that, while still comically uneven, now resembled fabric rather than tangled philosophy. But he didn't care about the stitches. He cared about Thursday. When he entered the library, the Knit Wits were already assembled. But tonight they weren't whispering or planning anything mischievous. They were waiting. Doris spotted him first. Ah, our brave hero has arrived. Brandon rubbed the back of his neck. Hero? Clarice grinned. You're dating Sandra now. What? Brandon blinked. No, we're not. Yet, Jean corrected. Lorraine leaned forward conspiratorially. She cares about you. She called her grandmother 3 times this week. 3? Betty echoed, holding up 3 fingers like she was revealing a winning poker hand. Brandon blinked again. About what? You, Doris said simply. Before he could answer, the door opened. Sandra stood there, holding her project bag like it was a shield. Her eyes found Brandon almost instantly. Something unspoken tightened between them. Recognition, relief, nerves, all wrapped into one glance. Hi, she said. It was a simple word, but her voice carried warmth and caution in equal measure. "Hi," Brandon said back, and for a moment the room felt too small, too quiet, too full of possibilities. Sandra sat beside him, and this time she didn't leave space. Their knees brushed. Neither of them adjusted. The Knit Wits collectively melted into elderly puddles of delight. Doris cleared her throat like an MC. "Tonight," she announced, "we work on finishing the first half of your joint scarf." Sandra groaned. "Oh no." Brandon grinned. "Oh yes." Clarice leaned over Brandon's shoulder. "Let's see your progress, dear." He lifted his half of the scarf. It was uneven, bumpy, lopsided, but undeniably a scarf. "Oh," Doris gasped. "He's improving." "He really is," Betty said, genuinely proud. Jean dabbed at her eyes. "Our little yarn soldier is growing up." Sandra examined it with a raised brow. "It's not awful." Brandon put a hand on his chest. "High praise." "I didn't say it was good," she added quickly. "You didn't say it wasn't." She fought a smile. The Knit Wits watched them like spectators at a tennis match, heads turning with each line of dialogue. They worked in relative peace for 15 minutes. Relative because peace with the Knit Wits in the room was always half noisy, half comforting. Sandra's half of the scarf had improved too. Her tension was less extreme, and she'd mastered the basic stitch. She held the yarn with natural coordination. Brandon said, "You're good at this." "I'm average at this." "Well, you're good compared to me." "That's a low bar." "You still cleared it." She paused mid-stitch, looking at him with something soft and uncertain. "Why do you do that?" "What?" "Make everything feel less scary." He considered that. "Maybe because I know what scary feels like." Her gaze softened even more. Before she could respond, Doris clapped. "All right, girls and gentlemen, break time." Snacks materialized. Tea flowed. Chairs creaked as the Knit Wits swirled around them like a cozy hurricane. Sandra and Brandon sat off to the side, the half-finished scarf laid across both laps. Sandra breathed in deeply, then exhaled. Her voice dropped to a quiet, vulnerable register. "Brandon, can we talk?" "Of course. I've been thinking a lot since last week." She twisted her fingers nervously. "About us. About what I felt when I saw you with Mandy." "I'm sorry if that hurt," he said gently. "It didn't hurt," she said. "It scared me, because I didn't expect to care." He waited, patient, steady. "I'm not good at relationships," she admitted. "I overthink. I assume the worst. I don't trust myself sometimes." He nodded. "I know. But the thing is," she swallowed, "I don't want fear to decide everything anymore." Brandon felt something shift deep inside him, warm and grounding. "So," she continued, "I think I want to try, really try, with you." He exhaled, slow and relieved. "I want that too," he said. "Even with my panic and overthinking?" "Yes." "Even if I get scared again?" "Yes." "Even if," he gently touched her hand. "Sandra, I want you, not a perfect version of you. Just you." She went still, eyes wide as if no one had ever said something so simple and straightforward to her before. Her shoulders relaxed. Her breath softened. Then she whispered, "Okay." The Knit Wits pretended not to watch but absolutely were. "Are they having a moment?" Betty whispered loudly. "They're having the moment," Jean confirmed. Doris clapped her hands silently like an excited child. "Bless fate." Sandra tried not to smile, but it was useless. The corners of her mouth betrayed her. "Ready to finish our halves?" Brandon asked. "Yeah," she said. "Let's finish it." They bent over their yarn again, working side by side. Their elbows brushed. Their hands met briefly when reaching for a marker. Each tiny touch carried a small jolt neither tried to hide anymore. 20 minutes later, their scarf halves were done. 2 pieces, one navy, one burgundy, very different in texture, but both made with real effort. Doris rushed over. "Time to join them." Sandra blinked. "Join them?" Clarice grinned. "Sew them together, dear. 2 halves becoming 1. You know, symbolism." Sandra groaned. "I walked right into that one." Brandon chuckled. "We always do." They sewed the pieces together while the Knit Wits watched in rapt emotional silence, occasionally sniffling or whispering about destiny. When they finished, they held up the scarf. It was imperfect, uneven, full of flaws, full of character, and warm. Sandra stared at it quietly. "It's ugly. Beautifully ugly," Brandon said. "A masterpiece of mediocrity. I love it." She looked at him, and something in her softened again. Really softened. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Brandon?" she murmured. "Yeah. I'm glad I came tonight." He smiled. "I'm glad you came last week. If you tell Grandma that, I'll deny it." He laughed. "Your secret's safe." She exhaled, a gentle, trembling breath. "Thank you for being patient with me." "Thank you," he said, "for giving this a chance." She didn't respond with words. Instead, she slid her hand into his under the table, small and tentative. He didn't squeeze immediately. He let her set the pace. Then he laced their fingers together, slow and steady. Sandra's breath hitched just once. Outside the window, Dusk settled across the town, and the library lights glowed warm in the fading evening. Inside room B, the Knit Wits cheered quietly, well, quietly for them, as if years of matchmaking expertise had finally borne fruit. And maybe it had, because this wasn't just a beginning. It was a choice, a courageous, imperfect, beautifully human choice. Chapter 9 Dating, Knit Wits Style. If someone had told Brandon that his first real date in years would begin with a scarf intervention staged by 5 elderly knitting enthusiasts, he would have laughed them out of the room. But here he was, on a Saturday afternoon, standing in front of the downtown bakery while the Knit Wits supervised from a distance. Supervised was perhaps the wrong word. They were lurking. Doris peeked around a newspaper stand. Jean pretended to inspect a houseplant in the window. Clarice had binoculars. Actual binoculars. Sandra had not yet noticed them. Brandon was praying to every merciful force in the universe that she never would. He smoothed his jacket and checked his watch again. She was only 2 minutes late, but his pulse quickened anyway. Then he saw her. Sandra walked up the sidewalk wearing a soft gray sweater and dark jeans, hair loose around her shoulders, face touched by that nervous excitement she tried to hide. "Hi," she said, shy smile tugging at her mouth. Brandon's heart warmed. "Hi. You look nice. You too." 1 second of quiet stretched into 3, then 5, then 10. Sandra cleared her throat. "Okay. Stop looking at me like that." "Like what?" "Like you like me." "I do like you," she groaned. "You can't just say that." "I literally can." "Brandon," she whispered, "we haven't even ordered pastries yet. Should I wait until after pastries?" "Yes," she said firmly. "Okay. After pastries." He held out his arm, and she gave him that look, suspicious, amused, flustered, before looping her hand through. They stepped inside the bakery just as Doris ducked behind a lamppost. The bakery smelled like cinnamon, fresh bread, and a hint of magic, or maybe that was just the novelty of dating Sandra somewhere that wasn't a library or taco joint. They ordered pastries and coffee and found a small table near the window. Sandra tore off a piece of almond croissant and pointed it at him. "So," she said, "are you going to talk about your week or sit there smiling like an enigma?" He raised an eyebrow. "An enigma?" "Yes, it's unsettling." "Would you prefer mysterious?" "No, that's worse. Stoic. Also terrible." "Then what should I be?" "Human," she deadpanned. "Normal. Relatable." "I'm very relatable." "You are absolutely not relatable, Brandon." He took a sip of coffee. "I wasn't aware relatability was a requirement." "It is for me," she said. "Because if you're too perfect, then I have to assume you're a serial killer." He choked on his coffee. "What?" She shrugged. "Red flags help me feel grounded." "I have flaws, Sandra." "Name 3. "I knit badly." "Not a flaw." "I overthink sometimes." "Not enough." "I'm divorced." "That's a life event, not a personality flaw." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Sandra, I promise I have flaws." "Prove it." He pretended to think. "I once ate an entire box of toaster pastries in one night." "That's not a flaw. That's relatable." He nodded once. "Then we're getting somewhere." She laughed. A real, warm laugh that loosened her shoulders and softened her posture. Brandon decided he'd like to collect more of those. After pastries, they walked through town. It was chilly enough that Sandra wrapped her arms around herself. Without thinking, Brandon shrugged out of his jacket and draped it across her shoulders. She froze. "Brandon, you're cold." "That's not the point." "What is the point?" "You can't just do boyfriend things." He blinked. "Is that what this is?" "I don't know," she whispered, mortified. "We're dating. Or something. We're trying." "I'm trying," he said softly. "With you." She closed her eyes briefly, grounding herself. "Okay," she said. "Then yes, boyfriend things are allowed." He smiled gently. "Good." They walked in comfortable silence until Sandra suddenly muttered, "We're being watched." Brandon's stomach dropped. "Where?" She tilted her head subtly. "You're right. Across the street." He followed her glance. There they were, the Knit Wits, huddled behind a street vendor's pretzel cart like 5 spies from a sitcom. "Oh God," he whispered. "Please tell me I'm hallucinating." "You are not hallucinating," Sandra whispered back. "Your knitting fan club is stalking us." "Why binoculars?" he asked helplessly. "Why does Clarice have binoculars?" "Because she's Clarice." Doris waved enthusiastically. Sandra waved back in resignation. Brandon groaned. "We're never going to live this down." "No," Sandra said, slipping her hand into his. "But at least we'll suffer together." His fingers tightened around hers. "I like the sound of that." "You're impossible." "You're adorable." She shot him a glare that melted the instant he smiled. They escaped the Knit Wits by ducking into the park. A few children ran around, leaves scattered across the grass, and a woman fed ducks near the pond. It was quiet and peaceful. Sandra stopped near a bench. "Can I ask something?" "Anything." "Why are you so calm?" He thought about it. "Because I've already lost something big in my life. It didn't break me, and I learned who I am because of it." She looked at him, eyes softening. And who are you? Someone who won't shut down over fear, he said. Someone who won't make you guess what I'm feeling. Someone who wants to build something real, at whatever pace you need. Her voice wavered. You make it sound so easy. It isn't, but it is simple. Sandra sat on the bench, pulling the jacket tighter around herself. I want that, she said quietly. I want something real. I just don't trust myself not to panic. You're panicking right now, he said gently. I know. And yet you're here, she swallowed. Because I want to try. Brandon sat beside her, close enough that their knees touched. You are trying, he said. And you're doing great, she huffed. You are annoyingly supportive. Thank you. That wasn't. Oh, forget it. He laughed softly. Then she turned toward him, breathing a little too fast, eyes wide and unsure. Brandon. Yeah. I kind of want to kiss you. His heart stuttered. Okay. But I'm nervous. That's okay. And I might be terrible at it. You won't be. And if I panic, we stop. She studied him with profound seriousness. Why are you like this? Like what? Easy to fall for. He felt the words settle deep in his chest. Come here, he whispered. She leaned in slowly, cautiously, like someone approaching an edge but trusting the landing. Their lips brushed once, then again softer, and the third time wasn't careful anymore. It was warm, hopeful, a little clumsy, but honest. When they pulled back, Sandra covered her face with both hands. Oh no. Oh yes, he said, grinning. That was. I can't. I'm going to implode. He gently lowered her hands. Please don't implode. I just found you. Her entire expression softened. Brandon. Yes. Do that again. He did. And the Knit Wits, who had absolutely not followed them into the park, cheered from somewhere behind a tree. Sandra groaned loudly. I'm moving to another city. Brandon laughed. No, you're not. She sighed. Fine. But we're having a serious talk with them on Thursday. Deal. She leaned against him, snug inside his jacket, their joined scarf tucked in her bag. And for the first time, Sandra didn't feel scared. She felt seen. She felt steady. She felt wanted. And Brandon felt all of that back. Twice over. Chapter 10, a new pattern. 3 months after the Knit Wits shoved them into emotional compatibility like two mismatched puzzle pieces, they were determined to make fit. Brandon and Sandra walked into the library hand in hand. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a grand reveal. It was simply comfortable. And that was precisely why it mattered. The Knit Wits collectively gasped the moment they saw the joined hands. Doris slapped her knee. Ha! I knew it. Clarice threw her arms into the air. Victory. Sweet, sweet romantic victory. Jean wiped her eyes dramatically. My heart can't take so much beauty. Lorraine elbowed Betty. You owe me $5. I owe you nothing, Betty whispered. But she pulled out the money anyway. Sandra sighed. You all have a betting pool on us, don't you? Absolutely, Doris said proudly. And it is thriving. Brandon squeezed Sandra's hand, fighting a grin. We should start charging them for emotional labor. Betty pointed at him. Don't get clever, sweetheart. You're still our mascot. Sandra dropped her face into her free hand. Why is this my life? Because you chose it, Brandon whispered into her ear. She peeked at him from behind her fingers, cheeks growing warm. Don't whisper sweet things while they're watching. Why not? Because they'll combust. Doris immediately fanned herself. Too late. The Knit Wits had set up the room with unusual flourish tonight. Yarn garlands, a table covered in pastries, a whiteboard with Welcome to the Knit Wits Spring Social, written in colorful marker. Sandra stared. You told me this was a normal meeting. Brandon blinked. I thought it was. Doris stepped between them, hands clasped with ceremonial pride. Tonight we celebrate friendship, crafting, and the triumph of love. Sandra groaned. Oh no. Oh yes, Clarice said ominously. Jean nudged the couple. Come now, don't act shy. You survived the group's 3-month compatibility gauntlet. Sandra blinked. There was a gauntlet? Oh yes, Lorraine confirmed. A rigorous emotional assessment. Very psychological. It was mostly vibes, Betty said. Doris clapped once. Everyone, gather. We have announcements. The 5 elderly women corralled everyone, including Brandon and Sandra, into a semicircle. Doris lifted a scarf. Not just any scarf. Their scarf. The navy and burgundy, uneven, slightly tragic masterpiece of their early bonding. The one they'd worked on together before they were ready to name what they had. We present, Doris declared. The symbol of your union. Sandra groaned into her hands. Grandma, please, Brandon whispered. It's kind of adorable. Do not encourage them, she hissed. Doris continued. This scarf represents the beauty of imperfection, collaboration, patience, romance, Jean added. Growth, Clara said. Chaos, Betty supplied. And hope, Lorraine concluded. Then all 5 women held it out ceremonially. Sandra stared at it like she'd been handed evidence of a crime. What, exactly, am I supposed to do with that? Display it lovingly in your home, Doris said. Brandon coughed. We don't live together. Yet, Betty whispered far too loudly. Sandra turned tomato red. Ladies, Brandon cut in gently, we appreciate the sentiment, truly, and we're honored. But let's not overwhelm her. He draped the scarf over his arm, smiling warmly at the group. The Knit Wits softened. Doris touched his elbow. You're good for her, dear. He nodded once. I'd like to be. Sandra's blush deepened. Not with embarrassment, but with something that looked suspiciously like happiness. After the ceremonial insanity, the meeting settled into something resembling normal. Knitting needles clicked. Tea brewed. Stories flowed. Sandra sat beside Brandon, leaning into him more naturally than ever before. Their shoulders touched. Their knees brushed. Their hands drifted toward each other constantly, like magnets. She watched the Knit Wits bicker over stitch counts and tea temperature, a warm fondness blooming in her expression. Do you ever think, she whispered, that we wouldn't be here if I hadn't made that stupid bet? He smiled sideways. Maybe, but I'm glad you did. I underestimated you. You still underestimate me. True, she said, but less dramatically than before. He laughed quietly. She looked down at her knitting, expression thoughtful. You know, this is the first relationship where I don't feel like I'm waiting for something to go wrong. Nothing's perfect, he said, but we don't have to fear the cracks. Sandra exhaled slowly. I'm happy, Brandon. He touched her hand. So am I. Halfway through the meeting, Clara suddenly stood. I propose a toast. Doris lifted her tea. I second it. Jean raised a cookie. I third. Betty held up a skein of yarn. I don't have tea left. Lorraine tapped her needles together. This counts. Doris cleared her throat. To Brandon and Sandra, for finding each other, learning each other, and allowing us to meddle shamelessly in their love story. Sandra hid her face behind her hands again. I cannot believe this is happening. Brandon laughed and gently tugged her hands away. Hey, she peered at him. He held her eyes. We can survive this, he whispered. Together. And just like that, her shoulders relaxed. She smiled. I hate how good you are at calming me down, she said. I know. I also love it, she added, quiet but sincere. His hand found hers under the table. And I love you, he said softly. She froze. He swallowed. It's okay if you're not ready to say it back. No, she whispered, eyes glistening. I am ready. Then, steady and honest, I love you too, Brandon. The Knit Wits gasped dramatically. Sandra pointed threateningly at them. If any of you clap, I swear. They clapped anyway, wildly, triumphantly, like 5 victorious elderly cheerleaders. Sandra covered her face. I need a new family. You have one, Brandon said, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Right here. She leaned into him, soft laughter escaping her despite her complaints. Yeah, she admitted. I guess I do. Later that evening, after the Knit Wits spring social officially concluded and all 5 women extracted promises for updates, photos, visits, and future scarf projects, Brandon and Sandra walked out into the warm spring night. The library lights glowed behind them. Their joined scarf peeked from her bag. His jacket hung over her shoulders as naturally as her hand fit in his. Sandra looked up at him, eyes soft. So, we survived. We did. And you love me. I do. And I love you. You do. She nudged him playfully. You're very smug right now. I'm very happy right now. She stopped beneath the streetlight, turning fully toward him. I never thought I'd be this safe with someone, she said quietly. Never thought I'd be seen the way you see me. He cupped her cheek gently. You don't have to perform with me, or be perfect. You just have to be you. Her eyes shimmered. And you just have to stay exactly like this. I can do that, he whispered. She rose onto her toes, kissed him slowly, tenderly, deeply. No fear, no hesitation. A new pattern, soft and steady, woven between them. She pulled back slightly, breath warm against his jaw. Okay, let's go home. He smiled. Not the polite smile, not the careful one, but the real one he'd almost forgotten he had. With you? He asked. With me, she said. Always with me. And hand in hand, they walked into their new beginning. Imperfect, hopeful, warm as yarn and twice as strong.